please welcome our Chairman and CEO, Eugene Kaspersky, former Cybersecurity Coordinator of the Obama administration, Howard Schmidt, and our moderator, Christian Freeland, editor of Thomson Reuters Digital.
I'm Tracy Freeland. It's great to be here this morning talking about such an important issue with such great experts. I met Eugene in Russia talking about the Russian IT boom, but I last saw him in Davos, where he was one of the belles of the ball last week, because certainly, particularly I would say in the energy sector and in banking, this is a moment when there seems to be a real dawning awareness of the cybersecurity threat, and I could see people looking at Eugene's badge, seeing his last name, and kind of making a beeline towards him. It's a real pleasure to have Howard here on the panel. Howard has had really an amazing career. As I was reviewing interviews with him and his biography, I don't know how you fit it all in. He's had a career sort of spanning some of the top jobs with global technology companies, obviously most recently this very important role in the White House, and a very distinguished military career as well. So Howard has occupied this sort of crossroads between the policy at the highest level, military, and technology, and I'm therefore going to start with him. A warning to you both, gentlemen, this is all on the record, so good news for my colleagues in the media who are here. And the three of us will talk until 11 o'clock sharp when we move on to the next item on the agenda. So Howard, here's what I wanted to ask you. You have served most recently in the White House dealing with the cybersecurity issue at this highest geopolitical level. I'd love to hear about the concerns that you have around those tables, the concerns the president has, and if you could maybe also explain how, for those of us who don't have the privilege of serving in the White House, why this should matter. Who gets caught in the crosshairs?
Well, thank you, and Eugene, it's good seeing you again, and everyone, thank all of you for being here. And the toughest job is moderating the two of us, because we may be here till about 3 o'clock this afternoon. But in order to deal with the question on hand, it's really interesting because depending upon who you talk to, their perspective is different. What's the most important thing? You'd mentioned the various sectors Eugene was talking with. In some places, it's all about the electricity. It's all about the energy generation sector is probably the most critical. Others say the financial services. And others appropriately say, well, the telecommunications industry. And you start looking at all these pieces, and the bottom line is they're so intertwined, so interdependency, that a failure in any one of those would inevitably, in a relatively short period of time, cause failures in others. The other piece of it, and this is the part that was focused on when I was at the White House the first time after September 11th, were those events that could be done in cyberspace, as we call it, that could indeed cause some sort of a kinetic event. You have a situation where you have a nuclear reactor that interfering with the industrial control system, digital control system, SCADA, whatever you want to call it, that causes it to either not recognize that something is going bad and let it get out of control and cause death and mayhem, in addition to the impact on the critical infrastructure, or the flip side of that is to make something that's working well look like it's not and causing people to shut things down, which then has the same effect. So the perspective is different. The biggest challenge is we're all not starting from the same spot. You'll take, and I'll use the energy sector for a moment. If you were to look at just across the United States, the tens of thousands of electrical related companies, whether you're generator, transmission, delivery mechanism, they're different. They're different companies. They're different stages. Some see security as a major component. Other ones are saying, well, we're not going to spend any money because we can't afford to raise rates. So it's really tough in the White House position on how do you look at this and come up with some sort of a plan to solve a problem that's everybody's problem. And last quick comment on that when you ask a question about what does the president care about? Well, obviously, there's two pieces. The commander-in-chief, there's the military piece of it and the defense of the nation. But the other side, the economic viability, which was an interesting and a very, very well thought out position as far as I was concerned. This, unlike the previous position I held, I was dual-hatted between not only the National Security Council, but also the National Economic Council. So you get to legally sit in a room and say, for national security, let's lock this down, let's turn this off, let's make this not work. And on the economic side, says, no, leave it on. It has to work faster. It has to do more for less. So it was this constant challenge and pressure trying to balance security with the economic impact that we would have if something does go wrong.
I think that's a really good point, and I'm just going to ask you a quick follow-up, Howard. How do you strike that balance? Because that's not just a balance that the White House needs to strike. It's a balance that companies need to strike, that individuals need to strike.
Well, the simplest thing is you understand there are no absolutes in this sort of insecurity. You must have risk mitigation, risk management processes in place. And the idea of saying somehow everything has got to be 100% secure is not good for business. And you have to sort of look at your own business process, also how that fits into the big scheme when it comes to critical infrastructure, either nationally or globally. And you come out and figure out, how do we get down this path? So there's no special key that you can put in that says, okay, we've got the balance. Because it changes day by day, situation by situation, and dependencies on the technology.
Okay, Eugene, I'd like to ask you to pick up on that, and in particular, having just been in Davos, I'd like to hear from you, is the perception of threat uniform across industries, or do different companies and different sectors think about this differently?
That's a little bit different because some industries they were victims of their very bad attacks, high-profile attacks, and they are really aware of the cybersecurity issues. Some industries they know about that, but they were not victims. And it's like they know there was a disaster, but it was in a different city. So there's a little bit different level of awareness. For example, the gas and oil industry, they are really aware because there are two attacks of which we could call the cyber sabotage or cyber terrorism attack on the Iran oil companies, which we don't have all the details, we don't have samples, but we have more information about attack on Saudi Arabia Aramco oil company, and that was a big disaster there. So the gas and oil, they are really aware of the security issues, and they are really scared by about the possible scenarios. Other industries which were not yet victims of such attacks, they understand the risks, but not so much.
Which are the industries that you would say are less concerned?
For example, transportation, because they were victims of the very serious attacks 8-9 years ago. If you remember such attacks, the network worms like Slammer, Blaster, the worms, internet worms of the beginning of that century. And there were very big damage on some transportation companies. The airports, the check-in was simply damaged. They were not able to check in passengers. As far as I remember, the railway in Australia was badly hit and it stopped operations. But that was 8 years ago, so they don't remember. But I'm afraid that every industry can be the victim of high-profile attack, which can not just damage the reputation of the company, not just to make their financial damage, but also paralyze their company, the enterprise, or government agency, what else. Unfortunately, last year we had such examples, and the IT security experts, we were talking about these worst-case scenarios for quite a very long time. Now we have the real stories, real attacks in our hands. Now it's much easier to talk to governments, enterprises, not only to IT security people, but to the CEOs, presidents, because we have not just scenarios in our hands, but also the real facts, what can happen, what already happened with some companies.
And from your perspective, Eugene, what are the industries that are most vulnerable?
I got to the endless loop.
Yeah.
Impossible to say all.
All of them. Well, let's think about the most critical industries which we really depend on. I think that's power. Because if there's a blackout, nothing works. Telecommunications, transportation. I think this is the most critical. Military. Could be military victim of such attack.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yes, of course, sure. 3 options. So I think that's power, transportation, communication, and military.
Okay, well, your point is particularly well made here on 16th Street because those of us who live in New York south of 34th Street saw what it's like to be without power. And it has an immediate and quite chilling impact right away. So Howard, Eugene made a really important point just now that the issues of cybersecurity have moved, outside of the very focused community of the security guys, the IT security guys, and are now being raised in the C-suite. Is he right? And are all CEOs, their top leadership teams, boards, really attuned to this issue?
Yeah, and I would never use an absolute like all of them, but I would say there's some that now are very much aware of it. As Eugene pointed out, those that have been a victim, you can guarantee the next board meeting this was an agenda item, and if they're good, and many of them are, it not only was an agenda item in the direct aftermath, but it's also now a regular every time you have a board meeting, it'll be on the agenda. I know some of the boards I sit on, that's the way we have it. But the problem is, and Eugene was absolutely correct, well, it happened to them. They asked someone, can it happen to us? And there's generally, if they get to talk to the security person personally, there's generally a pretty good understanding of what the risks are. But oftentimes it's filtered. So by the time it gets to them, it says, oh, yeah, it can't happen to us because they do business differently than we do. Or the one I heard which just blew me away was, well, we use passwords. Which is always
a unique practice.
Yes,
really.
nobody else does that. So the bottom line is, I think the biggest thing for us is that's where we really have to focus on some of the activity. I know Davos, in preparation for Davos, some of us had meetings to talk about that piece of it. Just since I retired from the White House last summer, we've had 4 or 5 events now where, meeting with security professionals and journalists is great, but oftentimes the same people understand the same thing. But having these meetings we've had with top-level CEOs, 40 to 100 of them at a time, major CEOs from a company or from a country, sitting down and saying, unvarnished, here's what's going on out there, here's how it affects you, whether it's just theft of intellectual property, whether it's potential reputation issues, whether it's disruption of your activity. That is on the increase, but nowhere near as much as it should be. 2 other quick points, if I may. One of them, in order to make sure at least we get the next generation, we need to make sure that the business schools are teaching us to the future CEOs the risk, not just about the financial risk or the sales risk or the international disruption of rare earth materials and things, but also the cyber risk. The second thing, and just one thing, because when Gene talked about the transportation side of it, it's really interesting because a lot of people don't think about our tremendous dependencies on that. So Eugene had talked about the ticketing piece. So if for some reason that just the ticketing system is down, doesn't have to be malicious, but it's down. You can't check in mobile like most of us do. You can't go to a kiosk at an airport. That means you can't board the airplane. The airplane doesn't get boarded. The airplane doesn't pull away from the gate, which means inbound airplanes don't have a gate to pull into, so they start stacking up. Eventually, in not a very long period of time, generally less than an hour, they have to start diverting airplanes to other airports. International aircraft coming in then have to start diverting. Think of the disruption that takes place because of a failure of a reservation system in one airlines. So these are the sort of things that the chief executives and the board of directors need to think of beyond just do we sell enough tickets to fill the seats next quarter.
Okay, you've succeeded in making me scared. But one of the things that you pointed to that I thought was really interesting was this experience you had of needing to talk both to the economic guys and the security guys in the White House. And I think something that I hear a lot from CEOs and from people inside companies who aren't actually on the security or the technology security side of the business is all that we get from our security guys is no. You can't do that. And we, people in other parts of the business, need to be focused on delighting our customers. We need to be focused on revenue. And just a flat no, frankly, doesn't really help us there.
And you're absolutely correct, and it's really interesting. The really good CISOs that I know Eddie's here. I bumped into him last night. There are a few others that are in the area. Coming from a security background, it's about, in the old days, it was about keeping everything closed in. You can't run a business that way. So the ones that have really moved forward, like Eddie and others that I know, have said, no, I'm not going to say no. I'm going to give you the tools to do it the right way and not cost you a fortune, do it quickly, to be able to mitigate the risk as opposed to trying to do anything absolute. And those are the ones that have been successful. That's the message. Now, there still will be technologists, and one of them, myself, that will still say, we can't do that. But that's a business decision, not a technology decision. And so you have to say, here's the alternatives, here's the way we mitigate that risk. That's the most vitally important thing that we have in that interaction between the business people and the security people.
So that's a very good point. There are two scenarios which can paralyze any business. First of all, it's a malicious attack, and second, too much security.
Yeah.
Okay,
Exactly.
how can what?
Yeah.
Am I imagining things? Is it possible to have too much security?
Well, I think that's it's possible to have too much security, but it will kill any business, any activity, and I think that I have to find a balance. And this is a very good question: how to find what's the right strategy to find the balance? Because as we're talking about the different industries which have meetings, they have conferences, they talk about security issues. What's missed there, as I recognize that, they don't have enough of expertise.
Right.
And it's absolutely right that CEOs, their company leaders, the government leaders, they have to have some kind of security, IT security education. They have to know at least terms they're talking about. But the problem is that's not so much of experts. Unfortunately, they are talking about education. I think it's let me speak a couple of minutes about that. There is not enough of IT security experts. I don't know any nation, any country which has enough of IT security resources to fix IT security issues within the next 10, 15, 20 years. There are not enough of people. So every time I have a chance to talk to government, I say, please invest more into IT security education in the technical universities. We need more and more experts, but we're late already. So it's not enough.
Eugene, does the industry and government demand for those experts exist? If I say to my kids, that's what you should study, will they get a job?
Well, actually both, I think. There have to be some basic education, and there are kids, universities, for everyone. Employees in organizations, the anti-social engineering classes, anti-social engineering training, drop the USB in your organization and see how many employees will take it and plug into their office computers. 100.
100%.
100% will so curious. So will they maybe except my company. Well, we are paranoid and we have such a training. So that's a very serious issue. How to find the balance between security and freedom, between their business procedures and the risks you are facing. And the different industries, different businesses, they are very different. So when I'm thinking about the right way, right strategy, how to find the answers for the security issues, I will split the different types of attacks in different categories. There is a cybercrime, which is mostly looking for the financial result of the business. So they are driven by profit. So they are looking for the bank account information, for the information which is available in your systems. It's a first group of, it's a first category of the attacks. Second, espionage. There could be hacktivists, competitors or governments, states behind these attacks, and the critical attacks on your critical systems. So the first type of attack is they're just criminals, they want money from you. Second attack, espionage, they want information from you. And the third type of attack, they want kill you. And depending on your business, split the risks into different categories, recognize how much damage you can face in case of successful attack, and how much of money your money, human resources, time you can allocate to fix these risks. Then maybe to turn some of your business procedures back to paper.
Paper. Shocking.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
So I really like Eugene's taxonomy of the different types of attacks. Is that a taxonomy you use, Howard? Would you add anything? Would you focus on any particular area?
No, that's absolutely correct, because one of the problems we have, and particularly when you start in governments more than anything else, everything gets lumped together. And I like to put it in very similar boxes. You have traditional cybercrime that involves credit card fraud, hacking into bank accounts, identity theft, these sort of things, which are traditional criminal activity that we're now seeing made either easier to not get caught that technology gives us. On the other end of the spectrum, we have, which we've had ever since nations have been evolved, and that's spy versus spy. That will always take place. We have to understand that. We have to understand that theft of intellectual property is different than trying to, turn the lights out and cause people to get killed. Prior to the internet as we know it today, back in the late 80s, there was a case down in Florida. And this, I'm really dating myself in this. Back in the days when we had war dialers, was able to dial up, get into, it was an Ultrix system, I believe, that was a city was using to control the traffic lights. That had a maintenance port, which most things do. So we were able to dial up the area code 813-111-1111, got into it. The password was default password, and was able to turn all the
password was just password?
The password, I know, it comes as a surprise, but they actually even did that back then. Or it might have been the other really difficult one. It was the default, which was 1234, which was the other really strong one. The bottom line is the kid got in, and it was a kid, got in and turned all the traffic signals in this little small town green. And the reason he wanted to turn green, because he thought it would be cool to watch all these traffic accidents. So when you start looking at that category, that's a little bit different than somebody stealing your plans for the next shape of soda bottles. So there has to be some recognition that these things are different. You, some cases, deal with these things differently, but the fundamental vulnerabilities that exist are the same across all these various sectors. It's an iframe vulnerability or a Java vulnerability, a buffer overrun, unbounded value. They exist, and they just get exploited by different groups. So when you start looking at the commonality and how you solve some of these things, the solution is always very similar, although the threats may be coming from different vectors.
I'm interested that you talk about kids, and Eugene spoke about hacktivists. My own 8-year-old surprised me a couple of days ago by showing me that she had figured out all of my passwords to all of my systems just by careful observation. So how do we deal? Kids are becoming very technologically savvy very early, and we're happy about that as parents, as educators. Their desires are not malicious in the way of an industrial espionage or Eugene's point about, wanting to kill you with critical attacks. But, you talked about this kid who wanted to turn all the traffic lights green. How do we handle that without sort of, killing that innovative, creative spirit that I think we all want to encourage in our young people?
Well, you don't. and you make sure that there's sort of, we talked, Eugene mentioned about training for professionals. We also have to take in consideration training just through normal lives. There was a program we have called NICE, National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, which looks at the K through 12 and teaching them ethics in computer use. In the early days, it used to be about software piracy. Because kids would be passing copies of programs back in the days when they were on floppy disk. Then it evolved to DVDs. Now they're copy protected. But those sort of things, you're still going to have a small segment of the population that's going to do it no matter what. But if you start teaching the difference between right and wrong in the virtual world or the technology world, it'll be a better place. One of the challenges that we've had, though, when you talk about your child and figuring out your passwords, is that's fun until it's used for the wrong thing. Some of the best security people I know started out as, I use the term very broadly, as hackers. They were not criminal hackers. I mean, back in the day, how I got started is because I used to have to figure out a way to...
Were you a hacker? Are you going to admit that now, Howard?
In the sense that those of us that would use to reverse the engineer the technology to get something done, to do your job, that it was the original term. Because hackers then somehow became criminals later on. But in the early day, it was just those of us that just figured, hey, it's a good way to take it apart and make it work. Yeah.
I want to explore further, Eugene, this point about hacking, the motivation of hackers, but also the possibility of reverse engineering. When there's a drone strike somewhere, it's pretty hard to take that shard of the weapon and rebuild one. How does it work in the cybersecurity space?
Well, there's not a simple answer for this question because there are different types of attacks. Some of them, they're quite simple, so it's very easy to learn from these attacks, easy to reverse engineer. But some attacks, they are very, very complicated. That takes weeks, months to analyze and to collect all this information. So the Shamoon, for example, which attacked Saudi Arabia oil company, Aramco company, that was quite a primitive malware. I don't know how much time my experts, not hackers, experts. So there are two different categories: IT security experts and criminals.
Okay, but do you agree with Howard that some of the experts started out as hackers? Maybe a little bit? Maybe a little? When they were teenagers, they had a little bit of Howard's background?
Well, I think that everyone who was teenager was a little bit hacker, not in the computer life, but in the usual life.
It doesn't have to be criminal, but it's just the process that you think through things, not what something can do for you, how it could be broken by somebody that's intended to do something bad.
So, but I think that's talking about the little kids' behavior. I think it's out of their of our panel. So the Shamoon, for example, it wasn't too complicated. I don't know how much time our engineers spent to analyze it. Maybe, definitely less than 1 day. Red October, for example, there was weeks, months, 2 months maybe, to collect all the information and to understand what's that. But anyway, to reverse engineer cyber attacks, it's much more easy than the traditional weapon, because the traditional weapon, it's typically it's destroys itself like a cruise missile. Yeah, it's not possible to learn cruise missile to disassemble it and assemble after it was used. With a cyber weapon, with the cyber attacks, unfortunately, it's very possible, and that's why my point is that the cyber weapon is extremely, extremely dangerous, because they are, if you have it in your hands, you use it, the victims will learn, and maybe they will send this boomerang back to you.
And do you think that we're already actually seeing this sort of a boomerang?
Maybe Shamoon. Well, there are different theories, different scenarios about attack on Saudi Arabia, and one of the options is that Iran learned from Viper. It was attack on oil companies in Iran, and they sent the boomerang back, and they decided to hit Saudi Arabia. Again, I don't have any data to confirm. It is one of the possible scenarios, but it could be reality.
Do you buy that scenario personally?
I don't buy, I sell.
Eugene has been talking to us just now about the sort of boomerang possibilities in cybersecurity with cyber attacks. I'd love to hear your comment on that, Howard. And also, you know, I really like Eugene's taxonomy of the different types of cyber attacks. Maybe you could build on that by giving us a geography of what's happening in different parts of the world.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When you start trying to look at geography, you have to really take into account cultures and where one nation stands, whether it's a developing nation, advanced nation. So geography is probably a tough way to do it. There's also motivation. In some cases, 5 years ago, some nations were less likely to become, from a government state-sponsored perspective, less likely to become a threat. That now after an election or after a deposition, that they're now a bigger threat. I think the thing that we need to look at internationally is number one, how much they recognize the disruptive capabilities using technology against either a company, country, adversary, its own citizens, and how easy it is to do that. You know, Eugene mentioned it perfect. I mean, you don't go out there anymore and have to find that one criminal hacker that can do stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of research out there. Everyone can do it. We have support now for pieces of malware where it's being sold with tech support and updates and vulnerability reduction in the product itself.
It's business.
That's correct. And anybody can use it. So it becomes a level of morality within the country. Oh, an example I like to use is the evolution of money laundering in the world today. Back in the early days where money laundering was very popular, not that it isn't, but it was more pronounced and less watched on by governments, that there were specific governments that were just happy for it because it benefited them. It benefited the leadership. They actually took part of the criminal activity to benefit themselves. There were some other nation states that said, okay, I'm not going to participate, but so they're going to run money through my banks. It's good for my economy. People buy new fast cars. It's good for my country, so I'm not going to do anything about it. Other countries said, hey, we're going to work together. We're going to create an international task force. We're going to hunt these guys down. We're going to put them in jail, take away their assets, give them back to the victims, whatever the case may be. That's where we're at now in some of these cases. Some of the countries saying, hey, look, if we don't have to do it ourselves, we can outsource this, and they can have our same benefit. If indeed disruption of some oil production somewhere benefits a company, we're not going to go after them. So there's the sort of thing that we really have to look at from a global political perspective is who's going to do these, why are they going to do it, and how do you stop them from doing it?
I'm interested, Howard, just as a follow-up in your focus on governments as the principal actors. Is that the case, or is the whole sphere of cybersecurity and cyber attacks one where sort of asymmetric warfare, asymmetric conflict is particularly possible, particularly pronounced?
You know, asymmetric warfare is sort of the total level, makes a level playing field for everybody. Now, what has got a lot of attention, when you look outside of governments, the expectation is you don't have the structure, you don't have the organization, you don't have the command and control decision making that you would have in a government. So the problem is when governments start getting involved in this, I don't know how many people here have ever read or familiar with Sun Tzu, The Art of War. To show you how bored I get sometimes on airplanes, I have one of my apps is The Art of War, and I read it from time to time. And I try to figure out what passage applies to today's cyber world. And one of them I thought was particularly fascinating. And Sun Tzu was talking about the use of fire in a battle. And I don't even remember what it was now, but so I translated that as there's some basic tenets. You would never want to use fire in a battle if the wind's blowing in your face. Okay? That just makes sense. The second thing you want to do, if indeed you want to use fire and the wind's blowing in your face, you better hope you have nothing that will catch fire. And the third thing is, if you have something to catch fire, it better not be important to you. I mean, I think those are some pretty good principles. When we look at the pieces of malware that are out there, they're being pushed around. Well, a government may say, this is a very, very well-crafted, very specific piece of malware designed to do something very specific. To believe that's going to stay there and never ever be discovered, never to be reverse engineered and changed, modified, that's just foolhardy. So what happens? You're playing with fire. You have the same vulnerabilities, which means you have an awful lot that's going to burn as well. Thirdly, the things that burn are critical. So the bottom line is, why would you just sort of throw that out there and hope that it doesn't come back and get you? Those are the things we really, really have to, from the nation-state level, start thinking about.
I have the answer for that.
Please.
Because you are responsible to send the fire, and you are not responsible. A different agency is responsible to stop the
stop it out,
fire.
right.
So you just work in a different government
Absolutely
agencies.
correct. Right.
And does that apply at the corporate level too?
Yes, I think so. Well, I'm not surprised that if some corporations, they also have their own enterprise intelligence. Well, I'm pretty
They do,
sure
yeah.
they do. Yes,
Yeah,
they do.
yeah.
They do. And maybe they use cyber weapons as well.
Yeah.
Or cyber espionage attacks. Maybe. Well, I buy this scenario. So maybe they do it. And that's why I think that the role of security experts is to explain that we are playing with fire and the wind blows back to us.
Right.
I absolutely agree.
Now, the fire analogy maybe makes me think that this is 100% preventable. You know, don't use fire and it won't come back at you. But I was listening closely to what Howard said, and a little bit earlier you talked about the security experts giving advice to the CEO on how to mitigate the threat. How should we be thinking about cyber threats? Is this something that we can 100% guarantee won't hurt our country, our company, ourselves personally as an individual? Or do we need more to think about it's going to happen inevitably, how do I deal with that?
Well, it's not a question, is it going to happen or not? The question is when and how bad. And there are some enterprises, they are facing thousands of attacks a day, well, especially their financial organizations. For them, it's definitely not a question, are they going to be hacked or not? Well, sooner or later it will happen. So I'm afraid the same is about any other industry, and it's the same for the critical infrastructure. It's not a question, are we going to face the cyber sabotage attacks or not? I'm afraid we will be. So we have to think about that as a reality, and we need to understand that we live in a very dangerous world. The IT systems, the computer systems, the networks, mobile systems, they were introduced within a very short period of time. And we didn't have time to adapt ourselves and our mindset, the security to handle these issues. It's like IT is a great innovation. I'd like to put it into the list of such an innovation as electricity, transportation, nuclear. So first of all, we enjoy, the innovation. Yeah, oh, electricity, oh, that's cool. Then we enjoy this innovation. Oh, there's an electric light. And then we face serious problems. And then we introduce security, government regulation, the companies responsible for security, the universities, they teach students how to manage the power grid and power plants, etc., etc. So first of all, innovation, benefits, problems, and then knowledge and expertise.
And you think we're now in the sort of security stage?
Yes, I'm sorry, and that takes decades. In case of IT, it's like that. We had no time for that. So that's why we're on the stage that the genie came from a bottle, but we don't know what to do with that. Right. We still don't have questions to ask.
I like very much, Evgeny, your parallel with, say, electricity or the combustion engine or maybe the discovery of fire if we want to go back into human history.
Exactly.
But here's the catch. Electricity was discovered and used, and that's been kind of it. We don't have constant innovation in the electrical field. Whereas with technology, it's constantly evolving. There are constantly new uses, new applications. We're moving now to people talking maybe about this, Google is very excited now about the self-driving car. I mean, how is it even possible for security thinking to keep up with the constant innovation we're seeing in the technology revolution?
Yesterday I sent an email to one of my experts. They're here talking about the security issues, and I said, how do you expect the perfect world after 1 century of innovations? So I believe
1 century.
maybe 1 century of innovations, non-stop innovations in IT. But well, to be honest, I'm sure that the human brain has some limits, and I'm pretty sure that maybe in some years, maybe 1 century, there will be the end of important IT innovations, like it happened with electricity, with transportation, and other technologies.
Okay, when is that, just for the journalists in the room, this will make a good headline for someone. When is going to be the end of technology innovation, according to Evgeny Kaspersky?
I hope I will die before the end of innovations.
Okay.
So that's such a positive message.
I agree, because you're sitting there and just when you think something new can't be done, it gets done. And that's the beauty of innovation and technology. I remember back I was telling someone on Monday, I remember when I had my first Z80 processor, one of the early computers, and it had a 16K RAM pack that I plugged up in the back, a Mylar keyboard, and I said, it could never, ever get better than this. And then they came out with the Commodore 64 with an 8-inch flop, and I said, it could never get better than this. And of course, many of us learned it constantly gets better. So I agree with Eugene. I don't want to be here if it stops.
I can add that you were just recently talking about crime, cybercrime, and you said traditional cybercrime. I just remind that 10 years ago, we were talking about traditional crime and cybercrime. Now we're talking about traditional cybercrime,
Right.
and the rest of threats.
Right.
Okay, that is a very good transition, Eugene, to my final sort of blitz question. Our time sadly is coming to an end. And so in conclusion, I want to ask, they tell me we have 10 minutes left because we started late. So I'm not going to quite get to my conclusion. I'm going to ask you one more big issue I'd like to touch on. We've been talking about the technology revolution, how it's transforming our world. One of the big transformations, Howard, is consumerization. And we see technology moving from being something handled at a corporate level, handled at the C-suite, handled by the CTO, and sort of flowing down to the people working in a company, to something that as individual consumers and as individual workers, we are choosing for ourselves. People are bringing their iPhones into work and insisting that they can use them for work. They're bringing their AirBooks into work, insisting they can use them from work, often to the rage and frustration of corporate IT security. How much of a factor is this, and what will the impact be?
It's tremendous impact, and I think it flips the whole paradigm upside down. I remember there was a movie a number of years ago with John Travolta and Christian Slater. They were pilots, and they had these 2 nuclear weapons on the airplane, and Travolta went rogue, and they crashed it, and they were going to steal the airplanes. And one of the guys at the Pentagon was saying, "We have a broken arrow." And the person sitting next to him says, "What's that?" He says, "When someone steals a nuclear weapon." And he says, "I don't know what bothers me worse than the fact that somebody stole one, or it happens so often we have a code word for it." And that's the same thing here. When you look at, where are we at? BYOD is a word now. It's something that we have come used to, because basically so many of us are bringing our own devices into work. It's no longer saying, here's the technology that you have, here's how you get to use it. You use it in your office, and then you don't get to take it home with you anymore. I remember the days of the old, what you used to call MIS departments, that used to that was your technology. And one of the most, and over my career, I've been in some interesting positions where we've created conflict, but is the one where you're sitting there saying, no, the technology you're giving me is not working, it's old, but this is what you get. So what had happened? I went out and bought my own modem, and I would dial up outside, which a lot of people would wind up doing. So it's
And I'm sure that was great for security.
well, at the time, it was security by obscurity. Nobody else knew what was going on. But the point being is now it's flipped around. People will walk in and say, we need this technology. And it's not only the general workforce that's doing it. You have executives walking in that says, oh, by the way, I've got this new thing. Make it work in our network. And that's sort of the way it works. The way you deal with that is you're on the front end of that thing. You don't have yourself buried where advancements in technology is sort of a bad thing. You embrace it. You anticipate, how can I make this work better? How can we make the business work better? How can I give that person the ability to sit there on the beach in Maui with their mobile device and answer a question or do a PowerPoint, and then they go back 20 minutes later and do their thing? Those are the sort of things that have to be thought through corporations, not, once again, stop, you can't use these things on our network.
Okay, that sounds like a beautiful scenario. Is it actually happening
Yes,
in most companies?
it is. It is, and that's the piece about it. When you start looking at, there is another business reason for this. Instead of you going out and spending, $1,000 US to buy somebody a device to do their job, they bring their own in. You give them a few applications. You give them some way to strong authentication. Use some encryption technology that protects your corporate data. That's a win-win all the way
Excellent.
across the
I
board.
love the business rationale. Force workers to buy their own working tools.
It does not. That's the piece. If you had to force them, they wouldn't do it.
Evgeny, what do you think about this consumerization and the impact that has on the security issues?
I think that we're a happy generation because we were born before the IT revolution, and we still wonder for watching these new technologies, new services. IT security experts, of course, they wonder watching new threats and cyber warfare, and I think it will be changed with a new generation because our kids, they used to see all these innovations. They used to live in a world of innovation. So big surprise for them will be the day when innovations just stopped. They will be big surprise for our kids when there are no more innovations, when the IT, sooner or later, maybe they will come to the plateau. So for us, I think that we can't talk about consumerization because we still remember the world before technology, all these technologies. I think that we are somewhere, we are a generation in between pre-computer era and computer era. So we are in between. So I don't accept the term consumerization because I still wonder.
This is using Rupert Murdoch's idea of the digital natives versus the digital immigrants.
Yes,
Correct.
digital
That's
immigrants,
correct.
digital
Yeah,
natives. That's correct. We are immigrants.
And what about Howard's term of BYOD? Is that something, bring your own device? Is that something people are talking about? Is that something you see your clients starting to grapple with?
What are you talking about? The digital is everywhere. All these screens, this photo camera, the guys who are managing our panel from over there. It's everywhere. I don't like this term, bring your own device. Because we are devices if we believe in Matrix.
I like that idea, that we are devices.
But they are now having conferences, seminars on BYOD. I mean, it becomes like cloud computing. We've been doing cloud computing for a long time. One of the first instances was when Hotmail was out there, then Microsoft acquired. So but now we have a word called cloud computing. Same thing with these things. We've been looking for mobile devices since the early days of the Palm Pilot, and maybe even before that. What was somebody remember what the first Apple Newton? The Apple Newton. So we've been looking for that, but now there's a term associated with it. And that was my point, that we wind up now, these things are so normal, there's just attach a name to it and move on to the next thing.
And I don't like the term cloud because, when you're connected to the cloud, technically the server could be somewhere in the basement.
That's correct.
Okay, our time is running out, so I'm now going to do my last blitz question. One of the things I've really enjoyed about this conversation is your openness to the new thing and sort of the baseline in the thinking of both of you has been there's something new coming around the corner. So what I would like to hear from you in conclusion, starting with Howard, then Evgeny, what is the new thing? What's the new thing that you're thinking about that maybe might be a surprise to some of us here?
You mean from a threat perspective, security perspective,
Whatever
innovation
you want.
perspective?
Dazzle us with the new thing that's
Jeez.
on your mind.
Yeah, and I think that the thing is on my mind is how are we going to take all these things that we have tremendous capabilities with and actually use them? You know, and I sit there and I've got probably 500-600 apps on here that I don't use. So a whole lot of this is wasted. So what can I find that's really going to make a difference in the way I run my life, I run my business, the way I communicate, have it all consolidated into something that's reliable, that I can get the benefit from and not be drawn into all this distractions. I mean, that's where I wind up wasting time is looking for other things.
Simplification is your new thing.
The new thing?
Simplification.
Yeah, that's it. Right.
Evgeny?
The new for me is that during 25 years, I'm in IT security for 25 years, so that's I will celebrate the first virus which infected my computer somewhere in October this year, 25 years. It was in 1988.
Soviet Union still exists.
Yes, it was
Wow.
Soviet Union. Yeah, there was no internet.
Right.
FidoNet, if you remember, ARPANET.
remember
Which
Fido,
I didn't
FidoNet.
have access to ARPANET, of course, from Soviet Union. So the news is that all the time I was thinking about future scenarios of cyber threats. I was thinking about future cyber threats, about the worst case scenarios, what it will look like, what technologies we need to develop to protect. And the news is that maybe we came to the worst case scenarios. From little hackers, kids, we came to the cybercrime, then organized cybercrime and hacktivists. Now maybe the state-sponsored attack and terrorists. And I think that's the end of the story.
So we've gotten now to
We
the peak.
got to the
We've
top.
seen the worst.
Yeah, in scenarios, not in real attacks. So the next, I think, will be the attacks which follow these scenarios, and that will be the worst case. That will be the worst we can enjoy in a cyberspace. So I'm optimistic.
Yes, no, I find that an optimistic
The
scenario also.
cyber terrorism in a global catastrophe or a regional catastrophe in a critical industrial environment, that will be the worst we will see in the cyberspace. It's the worst, so that's time to think about the perfect world, the secure and safe cyberspace for individuals, for enterprises, for governments, and for the world.
Okay, I'm going to summarize in one sentence. Your point, Evgeny, is there are no more unknown unknowns, to use that great
Yes.
Donald Rumsfeld phrase.
I
And
think
I
this.
do find that very reassuring.
Yes, I think that we explored the universe of cyber threats, and we have a knowledge.
We have a map.
We have enough.
And Howard's is we're going to enter an era of simplification.
That's right.
And I want to thank you both for helping to map this terrain for us and making it simpler to understand. Please
Yes,
join me in
and may I ask,
thanking them.
may I make a picture of you just for the memory?
Turn the house lights up.
One more. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.